Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Construct Innovate webinar series, which is on sustainability planning and construction. So this webinar is hosted by Construct Innovate and associated with Engineers Ireland. My name is Jamie Goggins and I'm co-director of Construct Innovate. So Construct Innovate is Ireland's National Research Centre for Construction Technology and Innovation. So we're going to run this webinar series for the next 7 weeks. And today what we have are 3 speakers. I'm going to speak about what are the SDGs and how do they relate to the design and construction in the built environment. We have Conal Boland, who's the sustainability lead for RPS, and he's going to speak about delivering sustainable infrastructure. And we have Gloria Callanan from the TUS, and she's going to talk about Build Up Skills Ireland 2030 National Roadmap. So what skills do we need for the next 10 years to develop in the country? So this webinar series is part of European Sustainability Week, which runs from yesterday for the next couple of weeks. And Ireland Sustainable Development Goals Week is going to run next week in there. So I'd encourage all of you to think about having an event for next week around Sustainable Development Goals. And that's what I'm going to do in my talk, is really just introduce the Sustainable Development Goals and maybe how you may be able to map the activities that you're working on against Sustainable Development Goals. So what are the Sustainable Development Goals and how do they relate to the design and construction, the built environment? As I said, my name is Jamie Goggins and I'm Director of Construct Innovate, Ireland's National Research Centre for Construction, Technology and Innovation. I suppose if you take one thing away from today, from me, this is a well-known definition of sustainability from the Brundtland report. It says, sustainability is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I think as engineers, we're really good at the first part, meeting the needs of the present, right? Really good. So if you think about all those developments that we've seen in our own lifetimes, we all now have mobile phones, laptops, and so on. That has totally changed how we can work, how we socialize. Really big impact in our lives. How we all have, with the access that we have now to the internet, to the broadband. If we think about the transport network that we have in the country, what it is today compared to what it was 20, 30 years ago. So I can get from Galway to Dublin by train, by bus, by car within 2.5 hours, and it's reliable as well. So we're having big impact on the needs of the present, what we need today, access to information, access to goods and services, access to what we need now. But for it to be sustainable, we need to do that without compromising of the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So if we look at how we're living in Ireland, for example, at the moment, if we are going to continue to live, or if everyone lived like we live in Ireland, we would effectively need almost 3 planets to sustain ourselves. So what that is saying is that we're taking more back from the planet than what we actually should, that it's not going to be able to sustain itself in the long run. And we know that other parts of the world have to develop yet, and are going to develop and are going to need to utilize resources from the planet from that. So we need, in our part of the world, to start to use less and be more conscious about the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So, the classical pillars of sustainability are the economic, the environmental, and social. And within these pillars, I've drawn the little SDG logos. So the economic side, the environmental, and the social. But these are the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were agreed by all 178 nations. So each of these Sustainable Development Goals, in behind them, there are targets and indicators in there. So the idea is by 2030 is that we meet those targets and look and measure at the indicators as we go along. Again, what I would advise you to do is to go on to the Sustainable Development Goals website, so sdgs.un.org, onto the goals there. And when you see the 17 goals, it's a really easy to interact website. So if I go into, say, SDG 3, good health and well-being. So, we can think about what does good health and well-being mean. But actually, if I click on it, I'll go into more information. And I scroll down here and click on the targets and indicators. And I can see all these indicators, what good health and well actually means. So by 2030, to reduce the global maternal mortality rate to less than 70%. But there's things here that we mightn't have recognized as quickly. So, for example, as civil engineers, for example, as transport engineers, target 3.6. So the target was by 2020, but it's to halve the number of global deaths and injuries from road traffic accidents. So, if we are working on transport projects that are going to reduce deaths and injuries from road traffic, we are contributing to target 3.6. Just take another one just as an example here. So if we take 3.9, for example, by 2030, substantially reduce the number of deaths and illnesses from hazardous chemicals and air, water and soil pollution contamination. Again, as engineers trying to reduce that, if I'm even thinking about designing buildings inside these rooms that we're all in now, the paints, the carpets and so on, they all have may have some toxins in them. They may have something in there that is affecting the quality of our air. So by specifying the finishes in our building, for example, we can impact on 3.9. So there's different ways that we can look at these, but effectively, people, planet, prosperity, peace and partnership is actually the 6 P's that are used. So this is an example of bringing them the 10 together from a report that was done by FI, where in prosperity, if we have affordable and clean energy, for decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, and sustainable cities and communities. That's the prosperity part that helps us to prosper as people. Looking after the planet, clean water and sanitation, life on land, actually you can put life below water there as well, climate action and responsible consumption and production in there. And then the people, the good health and well-being, and the gender side. Well, I prefer this way to look at it in terms of the wedding cake, the SDGs in the wedding cake. We have the biosphere on the bottom in there. So life on land, life below water, clean water and sanitation, and climate action. So that's the biosphere, that's the planet part. So the P for the planet part. Then you have society in the middle. So no poverty, sustainable cities and communities, peace and justice, clean water, affordable and clean energy, health and well-being, quality education, gender, and zero hunger. So that's the society, that's the people side. So the planet on the bottom, the people in the middle, and the prosperity in the economic side in terms of decent work and economic growth, the infrastructure innovation and so on, reducing inequalities and responsible consumption and production. We cannot do it on our own. We have to do it in partnership, and it's partnership between different disciplines together, but also between different nations and different people around the world. Here's an illustrative map of the SDGs dependency on the construction and real estate activities. So as the logo is closer to the middle, it has a stronger impact on construction, and the larger it is, the larger impact it has on construction. So again, we can look at this in terms of construction in general, but also we can look at it in our own individual projects. And I'll just do a little example of that now in a second. So they're tracking against how we're performing against sustainable development goals, and this is just some of the numbers, some global numbers in terms of at a glance how things are going. So as engineers, again, if you're a civil engineer, we have a big impact on the environment, on the built environment in particular, and currently over half the people around the world live in urban areas. But within those urban areas, then almost half or over half the people living in those urban areas don't have convenient access to public transport. But that's where the prosperity comes a lot from those urban areas. So 70% of the global GDP comes from the urban areas. And the proportion of people living in urban areas is going to increase. So that's the pressure that's on the whole system. If you're putting more people in a smaller area in terms of life below water, life on land, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, and so on in there. See, many companies, such as Arup, are telling their own stories through the SDGs. So if you look at the Arup sustainability report, I just pulled out this extract from it, and you can see how they are showcasing some of the projects that they have done, and they're relating to the SDGs. And also, if you just see down here, it's the SDG logo in there, but also you can see that they're saying which specific targets underneath it. So it's important that we pick out the targets that we're trying to achieve in there. And that's why I showed you earlier how you might go onto the website to find those targets. This is how we're doing it in the university. So our annual sustainability report, we have the second half of the report is all about how we are aligned to the SDGs and what we are doing in terms of supporting the SDGs. Because the University of Galway has made a pledge, we've signed an accord called the SDG Accord, and that effectively says that we are going to all major efforts from the university are aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals, targets, and indicators. So obviously, as a university, we have students and we have learning, so we show how the students and learning are helping with SDG 3 here in this case, clean water and sanitation. We have research, so how our research is helping to support SDG 6 here, and our engagement and also the operations within the university. So we have every SDG, we outline how we are contributing towards that. So this is what I think you could think about, and your projects and how your project might be supporting the Sustainable Development Goals in there. So if I take an example of tidal energy, so we do a lot of research in tidal energy within our group. So if I take the tidal energy, you imagine like the main Sustainable Development Goal that would support is affordable and clean energy. So if we take a tidal device and we deploy a tidal device or a river device, we say in the Zambezi River, then what we're getting there, well, we're getting clean energy because there's no fossil fuels associated with that energy, but also it's affordable and it's reliable as well. So we can predict the energy that we're going to get. Well, what might we do with that energy? So we say SDG 7 is close to the middle. What might we do with the energy? So we have SDG 9 here in industry, infrastructure, and innovation. So from our research, from our scientific research and upgrading the technology capability in the sector in that local area, and get them involved in the research and development of this new and novel technology in there. We can also help to build industry locally, so to maintain the turbines in there, to also maybe manufacture new turbines and so on. So we're helping in that local area by getting local workforce involved in the innovation and the industry. And obviously then that's leading into decent work and economic growth in there. We're going to get we get a higher level of economic production. Hopefully we can get technology upgrading and decent jobs for people. And maybe and then of course once we have decent jobs and people have some money to spend, then we can take them out of poverty. So this is still a significant proportion of the world's population is within poverty. The way we set up, say, the local companies and the workforce to work on this technology, for example, we make sure that the processes that we put in place within that company are going to reduce inequalities and take that into account, and similarly on gender equality. Peace, justice, and strong institutions. You could argue that this is, the core, or really one of the most important, if not the most important, Sustainable Development Goal. Because if we don't have that, we could destabilize everything, and all the hard work that has gone in up to that is going to potentially be undone. And then if we get affordable and clean energy, then that can help in terms of the sustainable cities and communities. So we have clean air, better quality air in our cities and communities, but also allows the cities and communities to thrive more when we can have affordable and clean energy in there. Now, as I said, we can't do these things on our own. You have to do partnership and work together. And how might zero hunger link into this? Well, for example, that tidal energy, that clean energy, maybe that clean energy could be used for refrigeration, for storage sheds for refrigeration. So the local agriculture could be stored, produce could be stored and last longer, and then we can help in terms of zero hunger. Responsible consumption and production, similar, and then life below water and life on land. We might be able to reduce the intensity of the agriculture locally in there in terms of being able to get the food to last longer. And if the affordable and clean energy was used in say primary education in particular, and for the schools, maybe the schools could open longer and have more reliable electricity in there, and so on in there. So you can see, just that's a story. I'm telling a story. So I think I have a call out, I suppose. The call out is that to consider your own organization and to see if you can align all major, or make a commitment in your organization to align all major efforts in your organization to the Sustainable Development Goals, targets, and indicators. And the second call out is, can you tell your story? It's a good opportunity to publicize the really good work that many people are doing in your organization. We have the Sustainable Development Goals Week next week in Ireland. And if you go onto that GeoHive website, if you just look it up, Ireland's Hub for Sustainable Development Goals, it's driven by government. It's a national initiative. It's a good way for you to get to be able to promote what you're doing. So that's my short talk, and now I'll hand over to Conal, who's going to talk about delivering sustainable infrastructure.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for the invitation to join this event, and thanks for that first talk by Jamie. Is really stimulating. So I'm just going to talk about sustainable infrastructure and some of the ways we can achieve that. The project you see on the right hand side there, that's the Arklow Bank. That's the operation and maintenance facilities in the town of Arklow Port. That's going to be the hub for the Arklow Bank wind farm phase 2 that SSE are developing. And you see the launches there that will be used to service the offshore wind farms. In the background, you've got a workshop, and you've also got a training center. And I suppose one of the dimensions to this, the design, was that it would welcome in the community. It would also be a display area, a training area, and a kind of community hub to learn and participate in the energy revolution that's happening there. So that's a project that's secured planning permission from Wicklow County Council last year. So the themes of the talk today, the sustainability of infrastructure is very wide. I'm just going to focus on 2 themes: carbon and circularity. There's obviously nature-based solutions, the social value, there's lots of other dimensions. We're going to focus on those given the time available. And the bridge on the right, some of you may notice it, it's in Cork. It's a footbridge crossing the River Lee, and it's going to celebrate its 100th birthday in 4 years, 2027. But there was an inspection done in 2017 that determined it wasn't in good condition. There was corrosion, there was decay, and it had to be addressed really quickly. The unique attribute of this bridge is it actually shakes, and the shake and the motion is part of the character of it, and it's a protected structure. And the project we undertook there for the City Council was actually to refurbish and repair that and give it a new lease of life. So complicated project, dismantling, some refurbishment on site, some refurbishment off site, reconstruction. But I think it's a sustainability success story in that it's a very circular economy. It's keeping what we have, refurbishing. There's some new elements gone in there, but as much as could be repaired and replaced has been repaired and replaced. And that's a much lower carbon solution than if you actually took the bridge and replaced it with a modern structure. So the built environment, we're conscious of how much energy is used in buildings, whether it's a house, a factory, an office, and we've been measuring energy consumption in homes and factories for a long time, and we've been making great progress in reducing energy consumption and moving from D, C, B up to A-rated homes and so on. But probably what I want to focus on today is the embodied carbon, or the resources and the energy that goes into the fabric of the built environment. So whether it's a bridge, whether it's a new motorway, whether it's an airport terminal, you can think of all the energy consumption that goes into constructing that, all of the raw materials that go into that, the use of water to construct it and to operate it, and the amount of waste that's generated. And that's just some estimates of what the built environment contributes. That's taken from a recent report by the Irish Green Building Council and AIB. So up to 40% of all carbon emissions attributed there to the built environment. Sometimes you see a higher estimate than that for all infrastructure taken together. So focusing on the embodied carbon, which I think a lot of civil engineering effort is moving at the moment. That's an interesting graphic from the OneClick, the Finnish company that does the life cycle assessment software. And what they're showing there is the green element of those graphs is actually staying the same. And as we decarbonize the source of operational energy, so as the gas grid and electricity grid get decarbonized, more and more renewables, that's reducing the portion. But unless we address embodied carbon, over time, that's going to be the most significant element of the carbon associated with infrastructure. So there's a good document here. If you haven't seen this already, it's a really good introduction and overview of what embodied carbon is. It's by the World Green Building Council. It's maybe 3 years old at this stage. And it's all about understanding the life cycle and developing life cycle thinking. So we've been very good at building solutions to meet today's needs, as Jamie pointed out. And we've been very much focused on the cost and safety and upfront effort. And making something work that's durable, reliable, and is fit for purpose. But we've got to start thinking about the operational phase a lot more and the end of life phase. So embodied carbon can be broken down into what's called upfront carbon. That's got to do with the raw material supply, the transport, the manufacturing, transport from the factories to the construction site, and the construction effort. And when you add all that up, that's the upfront embodied carbon. in a project, which is often really, really significant. But then you move through, as well as the operational, keeping the lights on and keeping the equipment running, there's also an embodied carbon in the use stage. So if a building is going to last 50 years or a bridge is going to last 100 years, in that 100 years, what do we need to replace? What do we need to repair? Are we swapping in and out windows? Are we swapping in and out pumps? And then you start to think about how long they're going to last, what the frequency is, and to do a full life cycle assessment, you look through that operational phase and you look at what the embodied carbon will be during operation. And it doesn't stop there. You need to think through then to the end of life. So when this product, building, piece of infrastructure is no longer needed, what's going to happen to it? Can it be dismantled? Will it have to be landfilled? Will it have to be incinerated? And what are the implications of that in terms of the carbon footprint? So a lot of the movement now in both your learning, if you're in college, and also in operational careers, is thinking about the full life cycle assessment, and in particular about the carbon implications. So this is a really good diagram. If there's one thing you take away from this, it's the philosophy or the mindset for reducing embodied carbon. So your potential to reduce things is highest at the start of a project, and it reduces then as you go through design, construction, and then to the operational stage. So the kind of 4 steps that you have to ask, or 4 tests to apply. First of all, is there an option to build nothing? Can you build less? And then what you're going to build, can you build clever? And finally, build efficiency. And this is quite challenging. We're used to just getting a brief and saying, well, let's get this done. But do we ever stop and say, do we need this at all? Could we build nothing? Is there a system change? Is there a refurbishment option? Could we repurpose another piece of infrastructure to do this project? And that's quite a dramatic thing. But I think if we're to do our jobs properly, we have to start asking those questions and challenging the need for certain aspects of a project or certain projects in the first place. And that's very much at the initial stage of the thinking in any particular project. You're moving on then to build less, and build less can be something like efficiency. So let's say you're going to build a 4-lane road. You re-examine that. Well, do I actually need the 4 lanes, or could that be done with 3 lanes? If you think of your own, if you were designing a house for yourself, you might say, well, we might need 5 bedrooms, so I'm going to build a 5-bedroom house. But if you were to apply this philosophy, you might say, well, most of the time there's only going to be 3 bedrooms occupied. So do we need 3 bedrooms and maybe a space that could be used as a 4th if necessary? So you start to challenge your thinking and try to find ways to actually build less. And if you achieve things on build less, it immediately reduces your embodied carbon very dramatically. When you move on to your detailed design, your design phase, then to reduce carbon, then you're looking at the materials you use, you're looking at the design you use, and you look for low carbon alternatives and efficiency at that stage and building cleverly. And then when you get to the construction site, you're looking then, what kind of equipment are we using in construction? Is it electrified? Could it be electrified? Is there offsite construction techniques? Are there modular techniques? How can I do this the most efficiently possible and save time and energy? So that's the kind of philosophy, and always keep coming back to that if you're lost in a project and you're wondering how to achieve more carbon reduction. So just to give you a case study, so this is a project that was designed for the Glasgow Airport investment area. So a new infrastructure, a new road going in to open up new development land near the airport. Underneath that array of crates there's buried high voltage cables, and they're running with an oil around the outside, and the temperature environment for these is quite important. So the design that was given here when we came to the project in a joint venture with Wills Construction was to build a concrete bridge over these cables. It's in bad ground conditions, so build a concrete bridge to make sure there's no settlement and the cables are safe. So the design team sat down with the client, sat down with Wills Brothers and said, well, is there an alternative to using concrete bridge in this situation? And they came back with a number of alternatives and spoke with the regulator, the Scottish Power Energy Networks. In the end, the solution was not to build a concrete bridge, but to build a structure from crates made from recycled plastic. So these are stormwater attenuation crates, normally used for a different purpose, but here they're used in a structural context. They can be built more or less by hand, very low construction effort, recycled plastic content, and a much, much lower carbon footprint than the concrete option. So in that one design change alone, there was an 87% reduction compared to the reference design, and that saved 1,300 tons of concrete. So critical to this was innovative thinking, but also that the regulator, so it would be the equivalent of EirGrid, was open to this as a solution, and your client has to be open to it, and your regulators have to be open to these as solutions. So that solution, or that was designed in our Galway office by the geotechnical team, and it won a Carbon Champion Award in 2021. So I suppose in terms of where the design industry is and where the consulting industry is in terms of embodied carbon reduction, this would be my own take on where we're at and where we need to push to in the next 5-10 years. And I've sort of set it out there in 4 levels, as you can see. So the first level is just, hang on, do we understand where we are and have we got a decent baseline? Then you move on to optimizing and adapting existing system and materials, and then pushing the envelope and transformative design and materials and innovation. The final step then will be striving for net zero, which will need another push in ambition and innovation. So what do we mean by level 0? Well, first of all, it's understanding the baseline and understanding the carbon footprint of a project. And if anyone says to you, they know all this already, I think they're telling lies, because we're only really a short number of years into this process. But if you do a carbon life cycle assessment, you start to understand what's the footprint, where is the carbon going to happen in this project. Then you can identify the hotspots, okay? So where's the most carbon happening? And that's where you focus your effort. You can do benchmarking. So the more data we have, we can compare it to other projects. Are we higher or lower? Are they achieving more in other countries? Do we achieve more or less on the last project? And then you start to put your team's effort together, working as a team to reduce the overall footprint. So it's becoming increasingly important, even to get planning approval for projects now. There's much more focus on climate and understanding the climate impacts and addressing the climate impacts. So an example of that, this is the framework. So there is an international recognized rigorous framework for assessing carbon footprints across the life cycle. So the infrastructure assessment is broken into before use, maybe the upfront carbon stage, the use stage, and the Bs, and the end of life stage. The subcategories, the units are standardized, and there's an international accepted normative approach to doing these calculations. So this is really good. We can compare projects across countries. We can compare elements of different projects from one to the other, and we can work really hard on benchmarking in this. So project where we applied this, probably going back about 4 years at this stage, Curtistown landfill in County Kildare, so it's just outside Naas, was a very bad news story, a badly operated private landfill that the state had to take over and remediate. And Kildare County Council was given the job of implementing that on behalf of the state. And they said to us, look, we want to push sustainability hard in this project. We want zero waste moving off site if we can, so big emphasis on circular economy. But on the carbon, we took upon ourselves to do a life cycle assessment of the detailed design. So we began to understand where the carbon would be in the construction and operation. And then when we went to the tendering stage, we challenged the tendering contractors to do their own carbon assessment and to tell us whether they were going to make carbon reductions. And that was a factor in which contract was picked. Then we moved on to the construction stage, and every month on this project is a monthly update on what the carbon expenditure is and what categories is coming in. So we can now track the as-built carbon with the proposal during the design stage. So really interesting. And this project has come to completion, and we're going to have a lot of data that we can share and move on to the next project. So again, the client ambition here from Kildare County Council was key. They give us the license to push this ahead. And the kind of data we got in that project, this is an output from the life cycle assessment. So we can see at what stage in the project is the carbon being felt here. So the A1 to A3, the products accounted for more than 50%, the transport about 5%, and so on. Construction processes relatively small, but maybe less than a quarter there in the refurbishment phase of the project, and then quite a lot in the end of life stage of the project, so 25%. And when I talked about hotspots and focusing on hotspots, and here's an example of a graphic illustration of what the hotspots were in the design that we did. So plastic membranes, all the liners for safety, for trapping gas, trapping leachate, that was the biggest hotspot there. But then asphalt, soil and gravel, pipes, and plastic floors were the next 5 categories. So straight away, your design team can figure out, like, let's focus our effort on these and see what we can do. So moving on to level 1 and reducing embodied carbon. The next area, a lot of people probably on the call are working on this already. A lot of consultants work on this, probably students learning about this. There are gains to be made in design efficiency, whether it's structural design of buildings, bridges, whether it's a foundation design. We're probably optimizing for safety. We're probably have room to re-examine factors of safety, concrete specifications, steel specifications, and look for that extra gain on carbon without reducing any of the other performance of the infrastructure. When it comes to material selection, we have to look more and be more ambitious on choosing low carbon concrete and low carbon steel and other materials that would have been the plastic liners in the last project. Looking at things like internal finishes, are they needed or could they be left out? Moving on then in the construction process, a lot of the bigger contractors are moving to electrification of plants. They're looking at alternative fuels. And there's a lot of movement in terms of off-site construction and modern methods of construction, which can, the building or infrastructure components are manufactured in a controlled environment. So technically it should be more efficiency, less waste, and they can lead to a shorter construction period. And the digital design tools can help in this optimization. And the first 20 or 30% of carbon reduction need not necessarily increase costs. So just a case study from the UK. This is a case study published by the UK Green Building Council. They looked at the infrastructure for a housing development for 750 houses in Cambridgeshire. And they challenged the baseline design and found that just for a 0.6% increase in cost, a 20% decrease in carbon could be achieved. So that was probably things like omitting drains and using swales, using more nature-based solutions, reducing parking areas, footpath dimensions and locations, curbs. It doesn't necessarily mean cutting corners on quality, but it means being prepared to embrace some new changes in design. So that's 20% achieved there with pretty much cost neutral. So the next stage is going to get harder, okay? The next 20, 30% reduction in carbon, which we need to achieve. We have to look towards innovation. We have to look towards novel building materials, new building systems, look towards biogenic materials. Wood is one, but there's other organic materials we can tap into. And what this means is getting out of our comfort zone. So more ambition from the client to push us in this direction, and also more flexibility from the regulators. So we're going to get into unfamiliar territory here, and that creates a challenge for everyone, but this is where we have to take things. So an example here from, I like this picture from the UK, from the University of Bath. That's the research team. Yes, they're using concrete for floors and buildings, but they're using it in a new form. So they're looking at a thin shell vaulted alternative as a way to just reduce the thickness, reduce the material use, and you can almost physically see there the reduction in carbon that's happening in that project. So that's the kind of innovation, and that pushes us into, more challenging design, more testing, more demonstrating that that's a safe technology, and partnership between the construction companies, the research labs, the material suppliers to make things like that happen. You probably have heard of cross-laminated timber as an approach that we can use structural timber or timber in a structural form and maybe reduce the need for concrete, reduce the need for structural steel in conventional buildings, and going above 1 or 2 stories, but going into taller buildings as well. So there's fantastic potential in this. There's very good case studies internationally. Obviously a bit of a journey to go, and we don't manufacture CLT in Ireland at this stage, but there's no reason we can't push in that direction. So wood and other biogenic materials potentially can lock up carbon, or there's carbon in that structure, but it was taken from the atmosphere to create the material in the first place. So the accounting of this and how we look at the end of life of these kind of structures is very interesting. Some researchers would say you can even take a building like this to be carbon negative. I'm not so sure that's true, but definitely it should have a lower life cycle carbon costs, particularly if you can do something with the materials at the end of the design life of the building. So just moving on briefly then to circular economy. I'll let you admire that picture for a minute. So that reminds me of the old days when Lego just came in one color. We had a massive box of this at home, just yellow bricks and endless hours of fun. And when you finished with one design, you didn't take the bricks and throw them in the fire, and you didn't take the Lego bricks and crush them to make new Lego bricks. What you did was you put the box in the box and you repurposed them next time. And we can learn a lot from Lego. It's got modular pieces, it's interconnectable, it's very much reusable, and your imagination is the only limitation here. And what we've got to do is start thinking about infrastructure and buildings and the built environment more in terms of something we can recycle and reuse and repurpose more. By and large, if you get things right on circular economy, you're also inherently going to be reducing your embodied carbon over life cycle, and that's important to remember. So I think our challenge as an engineering fraternity for infrastructure is to start applying this thinking in our designs and to try and live more Lego-like lives, and that's another good image to bring with you from the presentation. This is a complicated diagram that myself and my former colleague Warren Phelan spent a good bit of time doing, and we took research from a Finnish professor and expanded it a little bit. But it looks at the life cycle of a building and looks at all the opportunities you have to apply circular economy thinking. We probably don't have time to go into it fully today, but just if you look at the left-hand side, design and procure, when you're actually thinking about design of any piece of infrastructure or building, the kind of key words you need to think about are flexibility for future adaptation or flexibility of use. You're looking at things like modularity, modular sizes, modular dimensions, modular uses in cells in a building or in a piece of infrastructure. Durability is really important, okay? If you design flimsy things that are going to have a very short life period, you're obviously going to have to renew and replace them much more. So durability is a cornerstone of good circular economy thinking. And we're moving into this area of design for disassembly and waste avoidance. So if you go back to a steel structure, if you design the connections in a certain way, you can take apart the steel structure at its end of life. And instead of melting down the beams or the components, you can take them to another site and reuse them again. And that's where we need to get to, rather than carting things halfway the world to be resmelted into new steel. So we have to start thinking this way, and we have to apply designs that give us much more flexibility in the future, and then build that into our green procurement system. So that diagram is available. It's on the web if you Google RPS and green or circular economy, and you can look at that in more detail, and we could spend a whole lecture going through it. So the final message I have is just, if we keep doing things the same way, we'll keep getting the same results. We'll keep ending up with high body carbon, high operational carbon. We have to look to innovation. And I think the Construct Innovate is a really exciting departure. I'm just lucky enough to be a member of the Centre Steering Committee, to working alongside Jamie and Magda and pushing this forward. So what's really important about it, it's a combination of really all the third level institutes working together, but working together with industry and bringing together manufacturers, designers, people in the supply chain, and working on that collaborative approach. So practical solutions that will push us forward in things like carbon reduction and circular economy in Ireland. So get involved if you can. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Conal. Very good talk. So we're going to move on, just in the interest of time, to Gloria. So Gloria Callan is the TUS project officer based in Thurles, I think. So she's going to, they spend a good bit of time looking at currently what the workforce in Ireland, the demand in terms of the National Development Plan and so on, and where we need to go to in the future in terms of the skills that we're going to need over the next 5 to 10 years. So Gloria, it's fresh off the press. They're just finished their analysis, I think, and we're very lucky to get an insight very early on in the project from them. So thanks, Gloria.
Thank you. Thanks, Jamie, and thanks to Conal, and of course to Construct Innovate, and to all of the engineers who I think are from the west of Ireland predominantly, who are here today. I'm in the west of Ireland myself, and it's blowing a gale, so hopefully our connection will last. So I suppose follows on very nicely from the two really insightful presentations that we've already had. We're looking at skills. Jamie said for the next 10 years, actually, given that it's now nearly the end of 2023, we're looking at skills that we will need till 2030, so far less than 10 years. I work with Technological University of the Shannon, and we are the lead partner on a project called Build Up Skills Ireland 2030. The acronym is BUSY. We don't have a monopoly on being busy, but we are very busy. Everybody in the construction industry is very busy, and therein lies a little bit of the problem. So Build Up Skills Ireland 2030, we're looking at skills in order to meet our climate action and housing targets to 2030, and we're looking across the entire construction value chain. So the project is funded under the EU LIFE programme, and our lead agency is SINEA, which I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with. So that's just to set the scene. We're looking at Ireland specifically. TUS is the lead partner in the consortium. I'll tell you a little bit more about it as we go on. I'm hoping I could keep up with the slides now because I don't remember them. So Sinead, if you can move on to the next slide. Yeah, so just in terms of the Build Up Skills 2030 project, we're we have already, as Jamie says, conducted a huge amount of research. So we have a research team in Tucson with our partner organisations who have looked at what's called the status quo, and that is every report that has been written on skills needed in the construction and built environment areas in order to meet our climate action and housing targets. So that is one element of the work, and then looking forward to creating an action plan. A roadmap is the official term in terms of how we can meet those upskilling, reskilling and new skilling targets across all of the construction value chain. So moving on to the next slide. Yeah, so just in terms of the context, kind of have the same infographic as you in terms of embodied carbon and the carbon that the built environment is accountable for. The overall objective of our specific piece of work is around skills. We're looking at climate action targets. So we have analysed every single action that we are committed to in the climate action plan up to 2030, but also looking at our housing targets as well. And obviously those don't necessarily marry very well, but we need skills for both, and of course the skills for both are compatible. Thankfully, we're looking to 2030, but also keeping an eye to 2050. So those are the targets that are the context of our research and development work. So next slide. Okay, so just so you know the skills that we're covering, so I mentioned upskilling, reskilling and new skills, and we're looking specifically, just to mention this piece of work was undertaken 10 years ago, so before my time with the organisation, and it was led by Seamus Hoyne and Tuce. It was LIT at the time, both with similar partners in terms of the construction, the entire construction value chain, so education and industry. And at that time, 10 years ago, when I suppose things were very different, we were just specifically looking at energy efficiency and renewable energy, and we were looking at targets to 2020 at that time, and a roadmap had been prepared around 2012, 2013. Many of the actions in that roadmap were met, and so now we're looking on 10 years later to 2030, and added to that, you know, as dictated by all of the different targets and legislation, are skills needed for circular economy. So really interesting to hear Conal's presentation and the work that's been carried out there. We're looking at decarbonisation and embodied carbon, and we're looking at digitization and digitalization within construction, and how these areas can help us to meet our skills gaps and to meet the skills and upskilling needs. So in terms of digitization, for example, we recently had a workshop which we held, kindly hosted by Jamie and his team in Construct Innovate, that was held in Galway. We were specifically looking at digitalization and digitization there. So we were looking, as you'd expect, at BIM and at digital twins, and we were also looking at smart wearables and potentially robotics and training in that, and how that can support us to meet the deficit in labour, but also to support us to meet our climate action targets. I assume that here today I'm talking to engineers, so I assume I'm talking to civil engineers, mech and elect, but also environmental engineers. So I'm just making that assumption in terms of pitching this presentation. So next slide, Sinead, please. So again, just in context, I mentioned that we have an Irish consortium that's led by ourselves and TUS. Our partners in the project are the Irish Green Building Council, who are also partners in Construct Innovate, and I'm sure no strangers to anyone here. Construction Industry Federation are a leading member of our consortium, and we need that support from industry and the input of industry in order to determine what are the best skills and the best way to achieve the skills to meet our targets. And we're also supported by our partners in Laois Shoffley Education and Training Board, who of course have a Centre of Excellence in Mount Lucas, but are also leading in the modern methods of construction area. And just, I know this recording will be available in the presentation, but just if any of you are interested, this particular piece of work is happening all across the EU member states, funded by SINEA under the LIFE programme, and the piece of work from Ireland is feeding into the EU's thinking in terms of future policy. And I'll give you those timelines in a moment, but just to set that context. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. Yeah, so this, the timelines, the project started last October 2022, and is due for completion, full completed by March of next year. So in terms of European projects, quite a quick turnaround. As I mentioned before, this did happen 10 years ago, and a reporting structure was in place then. The reporting structure, as with all European projects, comes with its own terminology. So like roadmap, action plan that we're working towards. We've got a national platform, which is essentially our steering committee, and meets with the researchers and the team on a regular basis, helps to advise in terms of the direction that we're going in, and of course in terms of our research is reviewing our research and signing off on it before we would submit it to the Commission for review. So that's just some of the members there that you'll see on our steering committee, which is called a platform, and the intention is that platform will continue well after the project is finished next March in terms of monitoring and oversight of the action plan. Moving on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so in terms of what we've been doing since the project started 9 months ago now, we're just at mid interim reporting stage. So we've had a huge amount of engagement. There's been obviously the steering committee that I mentioned, which is wide ranging and cross-sectoral, government, industry, finance, education, of course, and just to mention that from an educational point of view, it is right across the construction value chain as well. So we're looking at schools, we're looking at education and training boards, we're looking at higher education, and of course continued professional development. So it's a huge amount of engagement, interviews, one-to-one interviews, workshops, online surveys, and presentation at events like this. So just moving on to the next slide. In terms of the face-to-face workshops, we've also had a number of online workshops, but in terms of the face-to-face ones I mentioned, nothing like meeting with people in a room and having people really tell you how they feel about your aspirations and targets for your project. I mentioned that we had one in Galway at the beginning of September, and our last one planned for the moment anyway is in Cork this Friday, and that's hosted in UCC. Still time to attend if any of you are in the area. We would love to meet with you and to hear your feedback on this, and I will check out that shaky bridge when I'm down there, Conal. It's a great example of circular economy, so thank you for bringing that to our attention. So just moving on to the next slide. Yeah, so I mentioned the timelines of project commencement. We have submitted their status quo analysis, and I know you're dying to hear some of the headlines from that, and I do have some slides on that. It is submitted to the Commission, and we should hear back this month. There's a huge amount of raw data that's behind the report, that's given us our projections, and in terms of how we can stand over the figures that we're projecting in terms of labour shortages and skills gaps. But I can tell you a little bit about it today, but it's not officially launched until it is signed off on by the Commission. And our work between now and December is in drafting that roadmap, so literally an action plan. And the call to action is that everybody needs to be involved in supporting us in terms of new skills, reskilling, and upskilling of the construction industry and the wider built environment sector as well. So you can see where we're at right now with the project, and for completion by March. So that roadmap will be ready for sign off by the platform by the 1st of December, and then we are on a roadshow with the roadmap to get buy-in and to make sure that that is achievable. So next slide. Okay, so some figures that you already know. We have looked specifically at not just at housing, we've looked across the built environment, public sector, commercial, domestic, private. So these figures won't come as any surprise to you, but we know are a huge undertaking in terms of the skills that we need for new housing. So that's on target as far as we can tell. And then in terms of the next slide, which is retrofit, so these are all quite small, but in terms of reaching the climate action target of 500 units retrofitted by 2030, we foresee a lot of challenges with that. Moving on to the next slide. So this is all in the public domain. Now this is intentionally small. We'll be publishing this within the next couple of weeks, but every role on the construction value chain has been analysed. So we'll be used to hearing about the shortage of engineers, and Engineers Ireland have plenty of reports about that. Architects, the idea of breaking it down into professionals and workers, but across the entire value chain, we have shortages, and we've projected, literally, as you can see, down to, in 73 workers that we're short, and that is taking into account the trajectory where we're attracting more people into the built environment in the construction sector. We're trying to increase diversity in construction, and we're working with schools. So taking into account what's already happening, we're still projecting a huge shortfall. So just moving on to that then, please, Sinead. Yeah, and sorry, just to mention before we come to that, a huge amount of skills gaps as well, and upskilling that is needed right across every single role, and new roles that are needed as well. So just moving on. Yeah, so between 100 and 100,000 is our projected shortfall, and I don't think that comes as any surprise to anybody, considering various other reports that have been launched and profiled in the media in the last 12 months or so. But in order to meet that, we need to work on an action plan, and everybody needs to work together. And I think partnership has been mentioned here a couple of times today already. There is no one agency, there's no one government department, there's no one educational institute, that can solve this. There is no magic bullet. We need to work together, and we need to break it down, and we need to attract more people into the construction sector. So IGBC already has a roadmap on zero carbon. Again, I think that may have been presented here before, or you'll be aware of it. And we're working using that methodology now, along with the status quo details and data and research that we have, and we're developing that action plan and that roadmap in terms of meeting that need and those gaps. And our ask is that we need people to work with us, and bodies like yourselves to work with us in order to achieve that. So just moving on. Yeah, so I mentioned the key figure of a shortage of between 100 and 120,000 additional skilled construction industry workers. And one report that I was reading recently indicates that we need that by mid-2023. That was a report from last year. So, we're already there. We are attracting more people into the construction industry, but we need to do more, a lot more, and it needs to happen quickly. The existing construction workforce need to be upskilled, and there's huge potential for reskilling, and the student population that's within the system at the moment in terms of adding modules to meet climate action targets as well. So these are just some of the highlights. So we need business as usual, and then this roadmap and this action plan. Just moving on to the next slide, and I'll try and move quickly because I'm conscious that we need some time for questions as well. I mean, there's some highlights from our research there that, again, I'm sure you're aware of. The dropout rate in courses at the moment, especially at higher level, is quite stark and is an issue, and is something that we need to do. We need to do more about. Okay, just moving on then. Huge opportunities. It's not all doom and gloom. We do need a lot more people in the industry, and we do need to upskill them in a really flexible, creative way, which may include on-site training. It may include a lot of different solutions and a lot of different entities working together, but there are huge opportunities in terms of career guidance, in terms of pathways, in terms of recognition of prior learning. And of course, the big one coming out of the OECD recent report is around support for lifelong learning, or we might call it continuous professional development. That's not just for specialist areas, but across everybody in the entire country. And greater diversity within the construction workforce, of course, as well, as a huge opportunity. So just moving on then. Yeah, the piece of work that we're working towards is that roadmap and that endorsement, and that's, I suppose, that the main takeaway here is that we need your support in terms of that for the people that are here today. And just, I think, finally, the last slide. Yeah, some of the visuals that I've used here today are from the Build Up Skills Advisor app, which is a European-wide app that you can download from any of the download services onto your mobile. And it is a platform that allows you to upskill and to retrain very flexibly and to enroll in courses that could be self-directed or with flexible learning like ourselves, and that's in relatively early days, but a lot of the new projected professions and roles and skills are actually already envisaged there in these visuals, and it's really interesting. So if any of you have any spare capacity on your mobile device, it would be great to see downloads of that. And I think the last slide is just the contact details if anybody wants. Yes, just some highlights from our interviews. Start everywhere. That's really helpful. There's a lot to be done. And just the contact details, I think, is the last slide.
Thanks, Gloria, and thanks, Conal. I see we're just running out of time. There's a few questions there, so I might just put them to you. I suppose, Gloria, I think they're going to be for you. So, Sita has asked about the potential for the boom and burst of the property industry. Has that been accounted for as business as usual protection?
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of our targets, in terms of our commitments and the targets that are nationally, but also in terms of Europe for 2030 and on to 2050, it doesn't look like there's going to be a slump in the next 20 years, which is good news for anybody looking at starting in construction.
Yep. And another one for you. Do you believe working from home or flexible learning is helping in the construction training, as hands-on is always more beneficial to learning? So that's from John.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So what we're looking at is a hybrid, is a mix. But definitely being able to self-directed study, being able to study in the evening or weekends, but also combined with obviously practical training on site or in a workshop.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to actually just, I suppose, thank the speakers, thank Conal, thanks Gloria, thanks to Sinead for the background, for helping us. I hopefully found that informative. I suppose what you may have taken away from it are the huge challenges, but also the opportunities. So from us as engineers being able to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, but also how we have an awful lot to go yet to be able to achieve those goals that are set out for 2030. Conal spent a good bit of time talking about the opportunities in terms of reducing our impact on the climate in terms of the carbon emissions. Again, massive opportunities there. We have the Climate Action Plan that sets out the goals in Ireland and the actions in Ireland for 2030 and beyond. So we need to get 51% reduction in carbon by 2030, and then net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. That is a requirement in there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming weeks on this. And then Gloria showed that the huge shortcomings are the huge shortages of the workforce, 120,000 people additional on top of what we have already between now and 2030 to be able to deliver housing for all and the National Development Plan and the Climate Action Plan and so on. So massive opportunities there. For everybody, but also huge challenges as well. So that's it for this week. So we'll send a link for the one for next week. There'll be more talk about the Climate Action Plan and opportunities there as well next week. We'll also, as the weeks go on, we'll have sustainable transport. We'll talk about heritage and culture and sustainable communities. And passive house design and retrofit and so on. So we have a whole mix of different topics to come up over the next 6 or 7 weeks. So thank you everyone for joining today, and looking forward to hopefully seeing you all again next week.